How powerful is the American Central Bank? Well, the Federal Reserve controls the money supply and interest rates and thereby manipulates the entire economy, creating inflation or deflation, recession or boom, and sending the stock market up or down at a whim. The Federal Reserve is so powerful that Congressman Wright Patman, chairman of the House Banking Committee, maintained, in the United States today we have in effect two governments. We have the duly constituted government, then we have an independent, uncontrolled, and uncoordinated government in the Federal Reserve System, operating the money powers which are reserved to Congress by the Constitution. Right, neither presidents, congressmen, nor secretaries of the Treasury direct the Federal Reserve. Nah. In the matters of money, the Federal Reserve directs them. The uncontrolled power of the Fed was admitted by Secretary of the Treasury David M. Kennedy in an interview for the May 5th, 1969 issue of U.S. News and World Report. Question: do you approve of the latest credit tightening moves? Answer: it's not my job to approve or disapprove. It is the action of the Federal Reserve. And curiously enough, the Federal Reserve System has never been audited and has firmly resisted all attempts by House Banking Committee Chairman Wright Patman to have it audited. How successful has the Federal Reserve System been? Well, it depends on your point of view. Since Woodrow Wilson took his oath of office, the national debt rose from $1 billion to $455 billion. The total amount of interest, you have to remember, folks, that this book was written here in about 1972. Anyway, the total amount of interest paid since then to the international bankers holding that debt is staggering, with interest having become the third largest item in the federal budget. Interest on the national debt is now $22 billion every year, and climbing steeply as inflation pushes up the interest rate on government bonds. Meanwhile, the gold is mortgaged to European central banks and silver has all been sold, with economic catastrophe innocent. Only a blind disciple of the accidental theory of history could believe that all of this has occurred by coincidence. When the Federal Reserve System was foisted on an unsuspecting American public, there was absolute guarantees that there would be no more boom and bust economic cycles. Sound familiar, Gordon Brown, The men who, behind the scenes, were pushing the central bank concept for the international bankers faithfully promised that from then on there would be only steady growth and perpetual prosperity. Yeah, and pigs might fly. However, Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh Sr. accurately proclaimed, from now on, depressions will be scientifically created, using a central bank to create alternate periods of inflation and deflation, and thus whipsawing the public for vast profits, have been worked out by the international bankers to an exact science. Now, having built the Federal Reserve as a tool to consolidate and control wealth, the international bankers were now ready to make a major killing. Between 1923 and 1929, the Federal Reserve expanded, inflated the money supply by 62%. Much of this new money was used to bid the stock market up to dizzying or even dizzying heights. At the same time that enormous amounts of credit, money were being made available, that credit money were being made available, the mass media began to ballyhoo tales of the instant riches to be made in the stock market. According to Ferdinand Lundberg, for profits to be made on these funds, the public had to be induced to speculate. Sound familiar? And it was so induced by misleading newspaper accounts, giving fuckers AAA ratings, Standard & Poor's. Many of them bought and paid for by the brokers that operated the pools. Bernard Madoff. The House hearing on stabilization of the purchasing power of the dollar disclosed evidence in 1928 that the Federal Reserve Board was working closely with the heads of European central banks. The committee warned that a major crash had been planned in 1927. At a secret luncheon of the Federal Reserve Board and heads of the European central banks, the committee warned the international bankers were tightening the noose. Montague Norman, governor of the Bank of England, came to Washington on February 6, 1929, to confer with Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury. On November 11, 1927, the Wall Street Journal described Mr. Norman as the currency dictator of Europe. Professor Carol Quigley notes that Norman, a close confidant of J.P. Morgan, admitted, "I hold the hegemony of the world, domination or rule or government by one group or person or blah, blah, blah." Anyway, immediately after this mysterious visit, the Federal Reserve Board reversed its easy money policy and began raising the discount rate. The balloon, which had been inflated constantly for nearly 7 years, was about to be exploded. Sound familiar?